Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. I'm just getting the presentation all set up for you. Before we begin, I just want to orient folks quickly to your dashboard. You should be either dialed in by telephone or joining by way of mic and speakers from your computer. You are all muted upon entry to the webinar as viewers. If you would like to ask a question, there's two options for that. You can use the raise hand function on your dashboard, and we'll see that and can take you off mute. Or you're able to use the chat or question box also in your dashboard to send questions to the panelists, and we'll see those and as best we can as we go along. We'll be able to ask those. If not, we will take them at the end of the presentation. We are also recording today's presentation, so if you need to leave early or are not able to stay for the whole webinar for some reason, feel free to send in any questions you have and we'll be sure to get to them, and you can watch it at your leisure. So Patty, I will turn it over to you with that.
Well, I want to welcome everyone to the Smarter DC Challenge's first webinar focused on our theme for this quarter, sustainable purchasing. And I am Patty Rose, as Christina said. I'm the Executive Director of Green Space and one of the managers of the district's simple, free, fun, and friendly competition designed to improve the sustainability of DC-based workplaces, businesses, nonprofits, and buildings, commercial and institutional. So whether you're a green wizard or an amateur, we're excited to have you if you're already a participant, and if you're not, we encourage you to sign up for the challenge and join the game. And you can register at www.smarterdcchallenge.com. And if you do register, you can get your first 10 points for participating in today's webinar. Slide 2. We're going to try to address the breadth of experience with sustainable purchasing in our audience that we've gotten a snapshot from those of you that were able to respond to the poll in advance. And so we are very fortunate to have Christina Macken from the Sustainability Purchasing Leadership Council. She's going to review the fundamentals and introduce you to the guide that she and her members of her, she'll tell you who was involved in developing the guide that they put together, and you'll learn where you can have access to it. It's an incredibly valuable resource for either your entry to or improvement of your sustainable purchasing programs. And then we'll have Jonathan Rifkin from the DC Government's Office of Contracts and Procurement to give you an in-depth case study of what the district has done to dramatically improve the sustainability of their purchasing of products and services and aspects of it that you can take advantage of. We'll also give you a brief tour of the purchasing activities that are part of the Smarter DC Challenge, and then have about 15 to 20 minutes for your questions. So slide 3, since I've introduced myself, I'd like to ask both Jonathan and Christina to introduce themselves to you before they begin their presentations. Jonathan?
Jonathan, you might be on mute if you are talking.
Christina, do you want to start?
Yeah,
and maybe then Jonathan.
Sure, I'll go ahead and then we'll have Jonathan introduce himself when he starts. So as Patty mentioned, my name is Christina Macken. I am the Director of Programs from the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. We were formed just about 2 years ago with the purpose of helping institutional purchasers essentially learn how to buy better and improve the environmental, social, and economic impacts of their spending. Um, Prior to joining the SPLC, I was the program manager for the LEED version 4 development process at the US Green Building Council. So I have quite a bit of experience in kind of multi-stakeholder based consensus development processes. So before we jump into the presentation, the first thing I want to do is just get a quick
Hello?
poll of the audience. Hey, Jonathan, we can hear you now.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure you could hear me.
No problem. Why don't you introduce yourself quickly before I jump into the poll then?
Sure. Apologies there. Strange glitch. My name is Jonathan Rifkin. I am the Sustainable Purchasing Program Manager for the District of Columbia's Office of Contracting and Procurement. I've been working in procurement for about six and a half years now, and about 4 or 5 of those I've been working in sustainable purchasing. Also, just some other programs and initiatives that I've participated in is I'm actually on the board of directors for the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which Christina is the program director for. I also sit on the NASPO, which is the National Association of State Procurement Officials, which represents the 50 states and territories. I sit as vice chair for our Green Purchasing Committee, and I'm a strategic advisory council member for the Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool, EPEAT, which is for computers and other electronic products. I sit on their advisory council. So please take it away.
Thanks. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to launch a poll here and ask all of you to click whether or not you are participating in the Smarter DC Challenge that Patty described at the opening of today's webinar. So I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to select your answer. Got about a little over half of you voting, so the other half who haven't voted, take a look at your screen and make a selection. All right. Close poll. And so it should be popping up on your screen. Just over 55% of you have signed up for the Smarter DC Challenge. That is fantastic. About another 15% have not yet signed up but intend to do so, and about 30% have not signed up and currently don't intend to do so, but hopefully by the end of today's webinar, we've given you some great reasons to invest in the program and to go ahead and sign up. So hopefully now you are back to seeing my screen. To give you a little bit of background on SPLC, it was formed in 2013 by a multi-stakeholder and multi-sector group of 40 organizations that was seeking to help society realize a huge opportunity. And that opportunity is for institutional purchasing to actually shape the market of goods and services. So to take the United States as an example, we estimate that institutional purchasing represents around $10 trillion in economic demand. This economic demand drives about 2/3 of the GDP every year, as well as 70% of US employment, either directly or indirectly. This is the largest and the most concentrated professionally managed economic demand engine that drives the US economy. So again, really big opportunity to shape that market. So institutional purchasers are literally shaping our future or have the potential to. And what we are finding at the SPLC is that increasingly institutional purchasers are asking themselves, what kind of future is my purchasing creating? And they're also being asked by others to take responsibility for the environmental, the social, and the economic consequences of their purchasing decisions. So for example, Dan Tangerlini, who was the administrator to the US General Services Administration, has noted that their acquisition of goods and services creates a carbon footprint of 9 times that of their buildings and fleet put together. So what that means is the day-to-day purchasing and those supply chain impacts beyond just the use of a product or service, but what actually goes into that product or service is very important, and really where there is a significant opportunity to make a difference and address sustainability and improve performance. What many institutional purchasers find, and I should say when I say institutional purchasing, I am talking about everything from government to healthcare to universities to corporate or small businesses, kind of all across the board, anything that doesn't fall into that individual consumer spending. So it's a rational professional spending that's going on. And another thing that we're finding from the institutional purchasers that we engage with is that the ratio that the General Services Administration found as it pertains to greenhouse gas emissions being, 9 times larger in their supply chain than in the actual use and operation of their buildings and fleets, is likely true for other impact areas like deforestation or overfishing, sweatshops and human rights issues, as well as employment discrimination, et cetera. The major impacts reside in the supply chain, and not necessarily as large of a percentage exists within the day-to-day operation. So in many cases, this means that an organization's greatest opportunity and responsibility for promoting an environmentally, socially, and economically just economy lies within working with their supply chains to ensure that the economic signal they're sending supports high social, environmental, and economic standards. So, of course, there are some major challenges here, and many of you who took the survey, the pre-webinar survey, spoke to a number of different challenges that the SPLC explores day in and day out, and that our resources are meant to serve. The first is a lack of coordination. Unfortunately, many leadership organizations are challenged with seizing this opportunity because of coordination issues. The broader marketplace is fragmented by purchasing organizations who tend to send similar but different signals about what sustainability is, what they want out of a manufacturer from an environmental performance perspective. And what that means is that manufacturers don't quite know how to meet everybody's need. And so there's a stagnation and a lot of tripping and bumps in the road where there doesn't need to be. So suppliers are experiencing this barrage of conflicting market signals, and it often comes to them in the form of surveys or checklists, variations in specification, and many of these different surveys and checklists reference a really increasingly diverse array, again, of similar but different eco-labels and standards and certifications in the marketplace. And so the signals are sort of sending everybody everywhere, and it's difficult to know kind of what to do. So that brings us to the root challenge, that the council's founders believed that the lack of standardization in how leadership in sustainable purchasing is defined, measured, and rewarded was really the challenge in the area missing to what was going on in the marketplace. So they came together around an ambitious blue sky question. Could we collaborate to launch a shared program for guiding, for measuring, and recognizing leadership in sustainable purchasing? So that the SPLC was born, and that's what we have begun to do. We bring together a community of purpose to develop a consistent set of resources that ideally enable the entire community of leadership organizations to send those consistent market signals up the supply chain to advance sustainability and mission objectives. So for those of you, skipped a couple slides. So for those of you who have dabbled some in sustainability, you may be familiar with the U.S. Green Building Council and their LEED rating system. And in a lot of ways, we at the council asked the question, could we do for the purchasing profession what the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED did for the building profession? Can we create a shared definition of leadership in sustainable purchasing, a common language for sharing practices and guidance across sectors as well as regions? And can we create an accessible set of guidance and a training program, as well as a framework that differentiates all of these different potential activities and labels and standards that exist out in the market? And I'm happy to say that in about just under 2 years, with the input of well over 100 technical advisors and about 130 different member organizations, we're delivering that value to the marketplace on a number of different fronts. Most notably, our guidance version 1.0 for leadership and sustainable purchasing that I'll talk about in a moment. Was launched this past February, and we opened up our pilot program. And this is setting the foundational piece for an eventual rating system that would differentiate and recognize leadership in institutional purchasing. So this major product, guidance for leadership in sustainable purchasing version 1.0. What is it? This is about a 200-page document that provides a set of process as well as product-specific guidance for how to create and run a sustainable purchasing program within your organization, as well as a deep dive into a variety of different purchasing categories for the specific actions that an organization should take if they're purchasing food and beverages or IT hardware or institutional vehicle fleets, etc. So chapter 2, which is kind of the first part of the programmatic approach to sustainable purchasing, explores the first 2 foundational components of the guide, which is getting a program commitment and a resource commitment to addressing sustainable purchasing in a strategic way, in a programmatic way that is not either kind of a contract by contract or product by product approach, but is really looking across the landscape of an organization's purchasing to understand where their major opportunities are, as well as where their major impacts lie. Chapter 3, Run the Program, gets into the steps you go through to undergo that prioritization process, and then essentially roll into a continuous improvement process where you're going through a cycle again and again to improve your impact over time. So just to talk briefly about Chapter 2, this guides the progression of activities that build more momentum toward organizational commitment and implementation of a sustainable purchasing program. So first, the person that we designate as a champion prepares a vision for what the organization's sustainable purchasing program could be and do for the organization, as well as for society. What's the impact that it will have more broadly? The vision could be for a brand new program at an organization. It could also be a revamped program that would have more resources, more cross-functional engagement, etc. The champion then identifies key stakeholders, so shares that vision with them with the purpose of enlisting their support in refining and promoting this vision to management. There's then guidance on how the key stakeholders design a program plan that describes both how the program works and how it will be brought into existence. And then finally, those key stakeholders working together work with management to win their commitment to the program plan. So just to show you a little bit about how the guidance is organized, you'll see that it's set up as a step-by-step process and kind of simple to interpret and digest guidance. And then there's examples as well as detailed guidance and tips along the way on each of the pages that kind of make for easy skimming and to the best extent we could, improved usability of the guidance. The same here. You'll see some situational tips around inviting stakeholders, how to communicate with departments appropriately, how to engage in a process that's kind of around improving an existing infrastructure or programs. There's also a lot of content in this section around how to recruit key stakeholder groups, such as management, sustainability staff, purchasing staff, budget holders. One of the things I noticed in the pre-webinar survey was how the coordination issue and the kind of getting support or getting people on board was something that I saw a lot of folks mentioned as a key challenge for them, really not knowing what to do with sustainable purchasing. And we provide a lot of guidance around, how to enlist support of those different audiences and take that into account. So Chapter 3 goes into the strategy cycle that we introduce to run the sustainable purchasing program. So a strategy cycle is kind of a flexible process for stakeholders to understand their opportunities to improve the environmental, social, and economic impacts associated with their spending, then prioritize the actions to best address those impacts, make commitments to specific actions, implement them, and then measure and improve their results over time. So to just run through these phases lightning quick here, in the launch phase of the program, the leader plans the areas of focus for a particular cycle, and then brings together the relevant stakeholders to participate on the team that would develop the plan. We then have a variety of guidance around how to analyze the impacts of spending. So the team chooses what type of spend analysis. We talk a lot about the kind of pros and cons and advantages with different types of spending analysis. And Jonathan will talk about the approach that DC used to collect the necessary data, analyze that, and then prioritize where it will focus to improve its overall impact. Next comes the planning phase, which is where the team would identify the complementary set of projects that would give the organization really the best chance to improve its performance given the focus area. So again, not looking at just a discrete contract or a discrete activity to do here or there, but actually looking at the big picture and saying, based on our current situation, how can we kind of get the most bang for our buck? The next part of the phase is what we call the commitment stage gate. And this is the point where we provide some tools to the team to help them win support from management or those who are kind of in charge of the budget or implementing new programs, things like that, in order to be able to implement the strategy that's been developed. Finally, we get to the implementation phase, which is where any kind of project plan or strategy that's been developed, all of those, it starts rolling out and actually happening. This is where the rubber meets the road. And finally, we get to the reporting phase. So this is where the tracking and metrics that get established during implementation feed into the ongoing monitoring of all the strategies that are in the program. So the program leader reports the results internally and externally as it makes sense. But this strategy cycle actually creates the opportunity for really great success stories to rise to the top and to be able to continue to build more momentum and more support for even better opportunities to improve the sustainable purchasing at an organization. So just as a brief example, what you see on your screen a sample organization that has a variety of different strategic focus areas based on where their purchasing resides. So has some major impacts coming from their electricity spending and a couple of projects planned to address that. Looking at the diversity of their suppliers, who they are procuring from, setting up some projects to address their IT hardware purchases, and then also looking at developing a human rights strategy to address those issues within their supply chain. So then in chapter 4, we have a suite of category guidance that helps kind of expedite that strategy cycle process that I just walked you through. And based on where an organization finds that they are spending a significant amount of dollars, can kind of lead them right to some of the best available actions and resources that exist in the market for improving that impact. So time for another quick poll. So what should be popping up on your screen right now is a poll about what purchasing categories are important to you when it comes to sustainability. So there's all sorts of commonly purchased items. I was limited to 5. So this isn't a complete list, but there's things like property maintenance products that are like cleaning products, sanitizing products, landscaping, office-related products like paper, computer purchases, looking for opportunities for green leasing, transportation purchases like vehicle fleets and fuels to support vehicle fleets, and food and beverages. So here's, several examples. I'm seeing that just under half of you have voted. So if you haven't voted yet, think for a moment about if you were to address sustainability, or when you think about sustainability, which of these categories kind of rings true for you as being important. We're just under 60%. I'm going to give, of participants clicking in, I'm going to give us 15 more seconds. 2, 1. Okay. So the results should be up on your screen. We see a lot of you are saying, well over 80% saying office products, so paper, computers, mobile phones are important when it comes to sustainability. Property maintenance products like cleaning products, landscaping materials. And just so everyone knows, you were allowed to pick more than one. That's why these don't add up to 100. Green leasing is also pretty important to about 30% of you. And then things like transportation, vehicle fleets, fuels, maybe not as important as the rest. So I ask that question because within our guidance, this is a summary of the areas that our guidance covers in terms of if you are buying these products or services, here are some of the best available actions to improve your impact. So hopefully our guidance resonates with a lot of you. One I will note that we do not currently address that is now on our agenda for 2015 is the green leasing opportunities. That's been something actually through my engagement specifically with Patty that we've been able to note as something that we need to focus on that's not currently in there. So our purchasing category guidance provides a summary of the significant environmental, social, and economic impacts. As I mentioned, the best available actions to address those impacts. So when you're trying to figure out what do I do, what makes a difference, we've gone through and done some of that work for you. Anticipated challenges, metrics and indicators to track progress, and wherever we can also recommended some policy and specification language. As I mentioned, the purchasing category guidance can expedite the strategy planning process that we outline in Chapter 3, and it provides a reliable and consistent way to kind of elevate purchasing to a strategic function within the organization and really start thinking about it as a cross-functional organizational issue that needs to be addressed and not just a discrete function that happens in one place in the organization. The last thing I'll touch on before we turn it over to Jonathan, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we launched this guidance in February, and we are currently in the midst of a pilot program where we are asking organizations to check out the guidance, try to use it, give it a read, and tell us what you think. Tell us what's working, what helps you do your job better, and maybe what we need to improve in order for you to do your job better. And we have a number of different benefits associated with participating in our pilot, including access to an education series exclusive to pilot participants, live feedback sessions with SPLC staff, as well as technical advisory group members who worked on a lot of the guidance, assistance from SPLC staff, as well as public acknowledgement features on our blog, in our newsletters, etc. We also have an online community that we just launched about 2 weeks ago for our pilot program participants, where we're starting to gather their feedback, allow them to chat with each other about trying to implement different pieces of the guidance. So if you are interested in learning more about the guidance or participating in the pilot, I encourage you to go to sustainabllepurchasing.org/pilot and click on the big blue button for express interest in the pilot. And if any of you may be finding yourselves in Seattle in late May, we are having our 2015 summit that is very much focused on guidance-based training for how to implement a sustainable purchasing program. We'll have lots of great case study presentations like the one you'll hear from Jonathan today, and a lot of opportunity within the workshops for peer-to-peer dialogue and problem solving. So I believe with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan. Do we still have you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfect, yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Christina. And I can say that the presentation you're about to hear, a lot of the thinking that SPLC promotes is the same thinking that helped DC to develop its program. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and jump right in. If you could just go to the next slide, please. So just to give you a little background about the District of Columbia, it's a sweet story. Jurisdiction meets Earth, jurisdiction falls in love with Earth, and jurisdiction wants to make that commitment to Earth. And it's a story that started a long time ago. And up until recently, I would say that we were very much invested, but we had a very ad hoc and opportunistic approach. The desire was there, but we didn't know how to take it to the next level. And I imagine that's where a lot of people on this call might be right now. But to be able to actually take it to the next level and turn it to something really great, we realized we had to overcome some challenges. Excuse me, next slide. And the challenges that we faced were really basic. First and foremost, we had never defined what a sustainable product or service was. And if you're going to ask people to make a purchase, you need to tell them what it is you're asking them to buy. I think that's just basic starting point. The second thing was that even though we were referencing the idea of sustainability in our policies and in our e-procurement systems and in our SOPs, we had never given people clear steps that they should follow in that process to take themselves to the next level. And so I think when you combine 1 and 2, where you haven't defined what you actually want them to buy, and you haven't given them steps to buy the thing that has not yet been defined, then you're really going to have, at best, a very confusing conversation. And so, next slide, please. We got busy. We actually received a grant from the mayor's office to pursue addressing those very challenges. And what we did over about a year period was we implemented a new policy. We improved our e-procurement system's ability to track sustainability. We talked to our vendor community a lot. We talked to our programs even more. We took a look at what others are doing for best practices, and we actually hired a consultant to help us through some of the more technical issues associated with sustainable purchasing. All this is on a webpage, which I'll show you how to navigate at the end of this presentation. But most importantly, we took the time to define what a sustainable product and service was. And we did that by developing sustainable specs. Next slide. And we did that for 14 product categories, which, when you take a look at all the subproducts that fall under each, amounts to a little bit over 100 unique products. So of course, there's many more that we can pursue, but this is a really great start, and we intend to add to this list as we move forward. So let me take a second to tell you how we went about choosing this first group. Next slide, please. So we had to make some decisions. There's only so many resources and so much time, and so we asked ourselves some questions. We asked ourselves, well, what's our current spending patterns? Where's the money really going? We asked ourselves, well, which other jurisdictions are already doing this? Because that's a good indicator that you might be able to do something. We asked ourselves, well, where can we save some money? It's always going to be a big seller. And we asked, well, how complicated is developing a spec in this area? And we tried to find a nice balance between the two, of the low-hanging fruit and the more complicated stuff. We also paid attention to the broader sustainable goals of the District of Columbia. And so we looked very closely at the Sustainable DC Plan, which is run through our District Department of Environment, and made sure that we aligned with that. And then lastly, we looked at laws that already existed, because when you have legal wind at your back, you're going to go a lot further than when you don't. So next slide, please. We took all of those ideas and we put them into a matrices, which you can see one line of right here. And based on our assessment of whether something was high value, low value, or neutral, we were able to make our selection process a lot more methodical and easy, which resulted in the 14 product categories you saw before. Next slide, please. So now that we had our actual starting point of 14 products and services, we needed to develop the sustainable specs themselves. And we started by looking at the existing contracts that existed for those products. Oftentimes, we're already doing something green, which was great. Second, we went out and we talked to the vendors, because the vendors are a wealth of knowledge, and it's always a good idea to make sure that the marketplace can support what you're about to ask them to do. Next, we looked at what other jurisdictions were doing to try to get a feel for what's going on in Maryland and in other jurisdictions, because if they're doing it, there's no reason DC couldn't do it and do it better, maybe. And then, most importantly, we talked to our programs. We developed focus groups to help gather input from the people who are actually buying this stuff. In fact, just to give you some detail, we gathered the top 5 spending agencies for each product category and made sure that their people were involved in the process. Because at the end of the day, it's their budget dollars, and it's their programs that they have to complete, so they had to be a part of this process. And that is how we developed our sustainable specs. Next slide, please. So when we were doing this, we knew that there's a lot of skeptics out there. And so we tried to include as many people as possible. We maxed it out to the point where it was manageable but comprehensive. And that meant that when we were talking to our programs, we did at least 30 organized focus groups that encompassed 75 program managers and contract administrators. We talked to at least 40 of our most prominent small and local vendors, ranging in, most of them were about an hour, but sometimes they were a little bit more even. And we read through about 200 contracts from other jurisdictions to get a feel for what they were doing. And then lastly was we did a lot of market research. Perhaps they were not statistically significant because you didn't have that kind of time, but you better believe that we went out there and pulled a sample of products that we intended to buy to get a gut feeling for whether what we were going to ask for was going to be much more expensive or, in some cases, much less expensive. Next slide, please. And then internally, we needed to get some buy-in from our top. So when we kicked off, we held an interagency meeting that included designees from the directors. So the top people in each organization sent people to participate in this meeting. And that sends a very important message. Once we had them in the room, we explained to them what it was we intended to do, how we were going to do it, and what we expected from them. And we, through as many of the laws that already existed as possible, we highlighted those because we knew that would get people's attention for sure. We also, just a point on this, is a lot of organizations create very, very large committees, which is a good approach in some instances. We took a more nimble approach where we let the people know that you're now on call to work with us, and we'll reach out to you when it's appropriate for us to reach out to you, as opposed to having standing meetings, which people tend to burn out from. Next slide, please. After we'd gone through the process, which took about 6 to 9 months, we developed what is probably the most important document and will be most useful to those of you on the call probably. And this is our specification guidance document. We created something that looks exactly like this for each one of our 14 product categories, and they all are broken down the same way. First, we include a scope, which if you just go ahead and click a button, please. Yes, we did scope, which just outlines the specific products that are encompassed in our spec. Next, we included our spec language, which is just basically the language that you would want to include in a contract, in a solicitation. Next, we included benefits. We included this because whenever we had conversations with our people, they always said, how much is this going to cost me, and so what? How does this actually help? And so whenever we could, we used enviro calculators to indicate in accessible terms exactly what the environmental benefit of doing something using the spec might be. We did the same for cost savings when it was applicable. Next, please. Next, we did a little bit of background, which is essentially a concise paragraph which explains the words and the intention of our specification, which also includes language, links to the sources from which we pulled that information. Anybody on the call who's interested in getting essentially a crash course in a particular product specification can use this to just prime yourself up for that. Next, we included a breakdown of the environmental profile of a given product or service, explaining how for some products and services you're going to care a lot about energy, and whereas for others you might care more about chemicals and toxicity. And so we highlighted that as it relates to that product in the environmental hotspot section. And then lastly, we included a section that explains the exact laws that our people were helping to comply with by using our specification. We also highlighted when we might be helping to contribute towards LEED certification, which Christina mentioned a moment ago. Next slide, please. So laying a foundation like the one we've just described is really, really important. But for it to actually operate smoothly, we recognize that we're going to need to, we are providing quite a bit of end-user support. And we're trying to meet our people and our systems where they are. So we did that. Oh, wait, back up, please. What we did was, first, we took a look at our existing templates within the context of our procurements. And we created, in some cases, pre-populated templates that could be used that already had the sustainable language included. We also created guidance and similar types of pre-populated documents for both large and small purchases because we don't know what they're going to need at that given moment. We try to anticipate their needs well ahead of time and be as detail-oriented as possible. Next slide. We also recognize that even with a good foundation and even with language on a silver platter, people still need help. This stuff's scary to them sometimes, and they don't like change, so you got to help. And so to help that, we created a user guide, which is, by the way, all this is available on our webpage, as is the user guide. And we are offering product-focused webinars. So if you're somebody who buys a lot of office supplies or a lot of printing services or what have you, then over the summer we're going to be offering webinars that allows people to participate and ask questions and to hear us talk about the spec in greater detail. We also are here as part of our job to just answer questions as they arise. And of course, we're going to reach out and try to engage contracts that we think need our input well in advance of when we got to bid for them. Next slide. All this works, and one of my goals for sure is to institutionalize all of this. I don't want this to be something that lives and dies by the level of enthusiasm of one particular employee. And so the ways that we're addressing that is by A, we actually didn't just create a training. We worked with the existing training teams that of our organization and made this a standard training. Just the way that there's a training to learn how to use our e-procurement system, there's a training to understand sustainable purchasing here in the District of Columbia. We created a policy, which of course is very, very important. And I think perhaps most importantly, we have actually integrated sustainable considerations into our e-procurement system. We use something called a REBA pass system. And this is a really key way to institutionalize because it's in your face and you have to deal with it every day. So if you take a next slide, I can show you what it looks like. This is what our new feature in PASS looks like. And all we're really doing is asking people to indicate whether or not they used one of our specifications. And if they did, that will generate a drop-down menu, which will allow you to choose the product category for which you are making a purchase. So now we not only know when a product is sustainable, but which one it is via a report. One other feature we added, just one more click, is a link that will take the user directly to our sustainable purchasing webpage, because people forget, sometimes they don't take trainings, or they arrive in the district after you've done your initial push. So hopefully that will be a useful feature as well. Next slide. If you say no, which we do allow, then we allow it, but we want you to tell us why. So if you click no, then that triggers a drop-down menu, which will let you tell us that it was either for reasons of cost, performance, or you weren't able to find it, it wasn't available, or maybe it just isn't one of our 14 product categories. And this is really useful because once we've had maybe a year of data on this, we're then well positioned to make some really great policy decisions. If it seems that everyone is saying no about a particular product because it costs too much, guess what won't be on our list next year? Versus everyone saying yes, and guess what we're going to create a mandate for in the following year if everyone's saying yes. So I'm really hoping that that will enhance our ability to move forward with the program. Next slide. So just wanted to show you all where you can find this information on our webpage. This is accessible to everybody. Some of it will be more valuable to you than others, but please take a look. And you can get there by give it a click. By going to the OCP webpage, which is ocp.dc.gov, and clicking on Opportunities and Support, or there's also usually a quick link. And by doing that, that'll take you to our Sustainable Purchasing webpage. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like. And if you want to look at our sustainable specifications, the 14 product categories that I mentioned, you would click on Sustainable Specs. Go ahead and click there. And one more time. And that'll take you to this page. One more click, please. If you click on any of these, you can review one of our specification guidance documents, like the one we reviewed earlier in this presentation. They're all laid out very similarly, and so and are hopefully somewhat self-explanatory. Next slide. This is where you click to find that, in particular the spec guidance right there. Other documents are more for internal use, but if you had an interest in understanding how we do what we do, please feel free to poke around at the other documents as well. Next slide. And then lastly, this is something I'd love for you to do. If you're on our page, please click on the Contact Us section on the Sustainable Purchasing page, and where you see that blue link, you can register to receive our ongoing updates. So on a periodic basis to be determined, we will begin to let people know about what we're doing, and we'll also use this as a list of people to reach out to learn stuff from you if you happen to be involved in selling products or services. So I think, next slide, I think that might be it. Yes, that's it. So thank you very much.
So I have to say those were two incredibly interesting and valuable presentations. This is Patty Rose again. And I will try to speed through this as quickly as possible. Next slide. So we want to help you know how to navigate to the purchasing activities and opportunities in the Smarter DC Challenge. This is the landing page you should see. You can either sign up in the green box in the middle of the screen, or if you already have are a participant, you can log in the upper right, next page. Once you register, you would see most likely either the blue bar or the orange bar. The blue bar is for the property track of the challenge, and the orange or yellow is for the organizational track. To access either one, you would click on the green slide button next to the word challenge. Underneath each of the blue or exactly, thank you. I was pointing my finger, but that wasn't doing anything. So you click on one of those, next slide, and you will get to, unfortunately, another landing page and click the Go to Challenge green button. That's right, next page, and you'll land here, and then one more click, Get More Points, and you'll land here, and you'll see the purchasing title in the drop-down menu. You can see all or any one of the themes. Purchasing is just one, and that's a way to filter the list. Next slide. And here are all the activities that are possible in the purchasing category for properties. Next slide. And then these are for the organization. It turns out there are a lot more purchasing activities in the organization category than in the property category. Next slide. As you can see, in each path, there are also innovation and gaming points. So if you come up with your own activity, be it just an innovative approach to purchasing or a game or game-like activity, you can get additional points for that. Or if you share that innovation or game with the other participants in the challenge, you can get even more points. Next slide. So it's time for some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, folks. So let's see here. Let's see. Okay, so question for me about if SPLC is for the District of Columbia only. No, we are based in DC, but we are a nonprofit organization that serves institutional purchasers globally. Right now, I'd say our initial set of guidance is fairly North American centric, but we have a number of international organizations that we've been engaging to help ensure that our guidance is relevant not just for DC, but for any organization that's looking to do sustainable purchasing. Let's see. Patty, there's a question about what is green leasing. Would you want to talk about that?
That's a pretty long conversation, but briefly, it's an effort to negotiate a lease that values sustainability through the various components of a lease, be it energy use, water use, levels of toxicity, etc. In fact, we're having an event on green leasing on May 13th, and now that we have all your email addresses, we will let you all know about it. So we hope that you'll attend that event as well.
Great. Patty, another question for you. Is there a way to access the DC Challenge criteria without logging in?
You mean the various activities? You can, I'm not sure about that. You can email me and I can send you a list of the activities without logging in, but we would certainly encourage you that if you have an office or workplace or property in the district that you join and participate.
Great. A question, I think this one is for me in terms of the purchasing guidelines. Did we consider the distance that either raw materials or purchased materials had to travel and other life cycle factors? So what were the criteria for selecting those products? So from the SPLC perspective, how we settled on our 8 broader purchasing categories, and then I think there's somewhere around 25 specific products and services that we address. We selected them based on a study that was done with the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, with the American Association, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, ASHE, looking at the university-specific sector, but taking a look at a variety of different colleges and universities and where what their purchasing patterns were. And what we found, the results we found led us to the purchasing categories that we initially prioritized, with the hope that those purchasing categories would probably purchase or cover about 70 to 80% of the spending of most types of organizations, regardless of the sector. And so if you noticed, there was a lot of commonality between the 14 categories that Jonathan's group looked at and the categories that SPLC landed on. And in some ways, it's because hopefully this means that the study that we did worked in that, there's a lot of overlap kind of at the up to about 80%. And then there's nuances based on whatever the specifics of a sector is. In terms of life cycle impacts, yes, we look at the social, environmental, and economic impacts across the life cycle, which does include the impacts of raw materials extraction. What we do find is actually transportation tends to not be, so the distribution phase for many products tends to not be as big of a deal as some of the other phases. So the actual manufacturing or processing, if we think about the extraction impacts of getting fiber to create paper versus actually transporting the paper, regardless of where it's from. Transportation impacts and kind of packaging impacts tend to be less significant than some of those other life cycle phases. And so our guidance does address that. Jonathan, do you work with the Metro Washington Council of Governments? Or Patty, I guess either of you.
COG, yes, we do. They have a pretty robust set of committees working on this type of thing. And there is a group that collects contracts that are considered sustainable and also tries to collect sustainable spend that each jurisdiction in the area has been able to capture. So, yeah, we work with them. They're great people.
Excellent.
And we have worked with them in different capacities, not extensively through the challenge program yet, but they've been very receptive.
Excellent. Okay, we've gone through the questions we have, so maybe we'll give it another minute if folks have other questions they'd like to submit. As Patty mentioned at the beginning, this session has been recorded, so we will be able to make the slides as well as the audio available to you, and we'll also be sure that you get the links to all of the different resources that we talked about today, including the SPLC's guidance, Jonathan's web pages, as well as the links to sign up for the Smarter DC Challenge. So any other...
and it will be available on in the Knowledge Resource Center of the Smarter DC Challenge as well.
Perfect. So any other questions, get them in about the next 20 to 30 seconds. All right. Well, it looks like that's a wrap right at 2 o'clock. So we moved along right at the perfect pace there. So thank you all for joining. Patty, thank you for inviting me to present to this group. I certainly appreciate it. And I'll leave it to you if you have any final words for the group.
Well, it was a real pleasure, and I hope you all got something important out of today's session, and we'll be doing more. So check back in, and we'll hopefully see you in person or virtually again. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.